radio went quiet on a Tuesday morning in late October, and I was 40 feet up a pole when it happened. I remember that specifically. 40 feet up, maybe 42. I'd been up that particular pole twice already that morning because the first time I climbed it, I realized I'd left my splice kit in the truck and had to come back down. And the second time I got up there and found that the connection issue wasn't at the terminal junction the way the work order said. It was actually at the grounding strap where something had been chewing on the weatherproofing. Squirrel damage, probably, though it looked kind of wrong for squirrel. Bigger teeth marks. Anyway, I was up there doing the splice, and my chest radio was on its usual background murmur, the company dispatch frequency from Muskogee, talking about routine stuff. Somebody needing a bucket truck in Claremore. Somebody else wanting a parts confirmation for a job in Pryor. The kind of thing you stop hearing after 11 years of it, the way you stop hearing the refrigerator hum in your own kitchen. And then it stopped. Not the way a radio stops when someone keys off. Not the mid-sentence cut of a dead battery. It just drained away, like someone slowly turned a dial from left to right, and I didn't notice it happening until the silence was already there and had been there for a second or two, just sitting in my ear, empty. I hit the button. Dispatch, this is Holt. Line 7. I'm getting nothing on primary. You copy? Nothing. I switched to the secondary frequency, the one we use when primary is congested or having issues. Standard protocol. Nothing on that either. I waited. Sometimes you get dead patches out in these hills. Cherokee Nation land east of Tahlequah sits in a little bowl of forested ridges, and when the atmospheric conditions are right, or wrong, I guess, you can have full bars on your phone and still get nothing on UHF radio. I'd worked this stretch of county for 2 years, and I knew its particular weirdnesses, so I wasn't immediately concerned. I finished the splice, tied it off, taped it up properly, came down the pole. I tried again from the truck cab. Primary, secondary, even the old tertiary channel that nobody really uses anymore, except during big storm events when everything else is already saturated. All 3 of them flat. No static, no carrier signal, just that specific kind of dead quiet that means the frequency itself is empty. Not blocked, empty. That was the first weird thing. I sat there in the truck cab for a minute. Outside it was, I want to be accurate about this, it was a normal Tuesday morning in late October in eastern Oklahoma. Overcast, maybe 55 degrees. The trees starting to drop leaves, but a lot of them still holding on. That particular brown-orange-yellow that happens in the Ozark foothills before the full drop. My truck was pulled half off a gravel county road, about 3 miles east of Tahlequah proper, on the edge of some Cherokee Nation timber management land. You could hear crows somewhere. That was it. No traffic on the road, no wind, just crows being crows somewhere in the tree line. I tried my cell phone, dialed dispatch direct. The call connected. I could hear it connect. That tiny electronic breath it takes before the call goes through. And then nothing. Dead air. Not even the standard, "Your call cannot be completed" recording. It rang into silence and eventually timed out. I tried again. Same thing. Okay, so this is a cascading failure of some kind. That was my first thought. And honestly, it seemed like the most reasonable explanation. We'd had something similar happen about 3 years prior, when a fiber backbone node outside Muskogee went down and took out something like 40% of the region's landline and cellular backhaul for about 2 hours. This felt like that. Bigger, maybe, but the same basic flavor of problem. Something upstream was busted, and everything downstream was just sitting there, waiting for it to come back. I made a note in my work tablet. Finished logging the job I'd been on. Drank the last third of a gas station coffee that had gone cold around the 2nd hour of the morning and tasted like warm cardboard. And I drove back toward Tahlequah. I want to be honest about something. The drive back was about 9 miles on County Road 20, and then down through the edge of town to the Oklahoma Department of Transportation yard, where I was supposed to check in that afternoon. 9 miles of back road through hills and second-growth forest and a couple of small creek crossings. Nothing remarkable. I'd driven it probably 200 times, and for the first 3 miles I didn't see anything wrong. Then, I saw the car. It was a red Chevy sedan, late model, And it was halfway off the road in a spot where the shoulder drops into a ditch. Nose down at an angle. Driver's door open. No visible damage. It looked like someone had just stopped and gotten out. The engine wasn't running. I pulled up alongside it and rolled my window down and sat there for a second looking at it. And I couldn't see anyone inside, and couldn't see anyone in the ditch or the tree line nearby. Nothing was moving. I drove on. A mile further, there was a pickup truck sitting completely sideways across both lanes of the road, and this one I had to stop for, because there was no way around it without going into the trees. The truck was running. I could see the exhaust curling up from the tailpipe. The driver's window was broken out, not rolled down, broken. The safety glass pellets spread across the seat and road pavement, and there was something dark on the door panel. I stared at it for a moment, before I understood it was blood. Not a little blood, a lot. I sat in my truck with the engine running, and stared at that for probably 30 seconds, which was about 28 seconds longer than my brain wanted me to stay there. Then I put the truck in reverse, backed up 40 yards, found a rough track that went into a pasture on the right side of the road, and pushed through the fence gap. There was a lot of noise and scraping along the passenger side, but my truck is a work truck, a big F450 with dual rear wheels, and the equipment boxes bolted to both sides, and it goes places regular trucks can't go, and it doesn't care much about fence wire catching on its mirrors. I crossed the pasture and found a lane on the far side that connected back to the county road about a quarter mile past the sideways pickup. I didn't look back at the pickup when I passed it. I looked forward. What I saw when I came around the curve that drops down into the eastern edge of Tahlequah is something I've been trying to describe to myself ever since, and I keep coming up short. It looked like someone had paused a movie. That's the closest I can get. There were cars stopped in the road. Not in a traffic jam way, not in an accident way, just stopped, mid-lane, like someone had hit pause at random. Doors open on some of them. One was running, hazard lights blinking orange, orange, orange into the overcast morning, and there were people in the road, walking, moving between the cars. Except, here's the thing about people who are walking in a normal way. You can tell, even at a distance, that they're going somewhere. There's an intention to normal walking. You're going to your car, you're going into a building, you're going toward another person, whatever. There's a direction and a purpose that you read without thinking about it. These people weren't going anywhere specific. They were just moving. Loose-jointed, I want to say, though I hate how that sounds because it's accurate. A couple of them were in the road, and the rest were on the sidewalk or in the parking lot of what looked like a hardware store on my left. And even at 300 yards, I knew something was wrong with the way they moved. The same way you can sometimes look at an animal and know before you've consciously identified anything specific that it's sick. I stopped the truck. One of them, the closest one, a man in a blue work shirt about 200 yards ahead, turned toward me. I hadn't made any sound. I was just sitting there with my engine idling. He turned toward me anyway, and then he started walking toward me. The others followed him. I put the truck in reverse. I need to talk about what I know, skills-wise, because it becomes relevant. 11 years as a utility line tech means you learn things about the physical world that most people don't think about. I can climb a pole or a tower without thinking about it. I know how to work with high-voltage equipment safely, which means I know how electricity kills people, and I'm very careful around it. I can splice fiber, run copper, pull cable through conduit in spaces so tight you have to breathe out to get your arm through them. I drive a big truck well because I've been doing it since I was 17, and because my job requires reversing into tight spaces with expensive equipment on board. None of that made me brave. I want to be clear about that. When I put the truck in reverse and started backing up on that county road, I was not thinking clearly or calmly. My heart was hitting my chest like it was trying to get out and go somewhere safer, and my hands were sweating inside my work gloves, and my brain was doing that thing it does under real fear, where it generates a lot of output, but none of it is particularly useful. What I was thinking, specifically, this is not a system failure. That was the whole thought, just that, looping. I backed up maybe 200 yards and found a side street on the left. It went into a residential area, small houses, chain link fences, big pecan trees along the street. I turned into it. The people from the road hadn't moved that fast, but they'd kept coming, and they were maybe 100 yards back when I turned. I drove into the neighborhood. The neighborhood was quieter. 4 or 5 houses in, no movement visible. A dog was barking somewhere, frantic and sustained. The kind of barking that means the dog has been going for a while and doesn't know how to stop. A garage door was open on the right side, and the garage inside was empty, except for a riding mower. A kid's bicycle lay in a driveway at an angle like it had been dropped mid-ride. I went through the neighborhood and came out the back of it on a road that ran parallel to the main drag, and I got my bearings and started driving north. North was the Cherokee Nation Utility Maintenance Depot. I'd been there twice before on joint work orders. There's a stretch of shared infrastructure outside of town, where the Cherokee Nation's own communications network runs alongside the state telecom lines, and we'd coordinated maintenance a couple of times. It was about 12 miles out, up in the hills. Fenced property, a place someone with tools might be able to do something useful. I had zero plan beyond that. I was just driving away from what I'd seen, in the direction of the one place I could think of that might be defensible. On the way, I passed through the edge of town. There's really no way to go fully around it, and what I saw from the road in those 3 or 4 minutes added up in a way I couldn't argue with. A convenience store with its front windows smashed out, products scattered across the parking lot, a woman lying on the pavement who wasn't moving and wasn't going to be moving again. A police cruiser with both doors open and the radio squawking static. A fire somewhere a few blocks over, orange light visible above a roofline. And people, infected people, though I wasn't using that word yet. I was using every other word I could find before landing on that one. Moving through it. Walking, not running. Some of them wearing completely normal clothes. A man in a suit, a woman in a waitress apron. They moved with that same directionless forward motion, and the ones that heard my truck went toward the sound of it, and I drove past them. I hit somebody. I want to say that plainly. Coming around a curve with cars stopped in the road, I swerved around the cars and didn't see the person until I was maybe 20 feet from them, and I braked but not enough, and I clipped them with the left rear of the truck. I felt it through the frame, a specific awful thud. I kept driving. I've thought about it since. I don't know if that person was already infected or not. I don't know if I could have stopped. I know I didn't. I keep that in the same mental box as about 40 other things I've been putting in there since Tuesday. The depot came into view around 11:30 in the morning, I think, though I'd stopped checking the time closely by then. It sits at the end of a half-mile gravel access road that climbs a hill and opens onto a flat pad of compacted red dirt with a chain-link fence around it. 8 feet high, with 3 strands of barbed wire on top. Inside the fence, a metal equipment storage building, a small concrete block office building, a covered bay with 2 work trucks in it, and a series of cable reels and conduit bundles stacked against the far fence. The gate at the entrance was standing open when I got there. I stopped at the gate and sat there looking through it before I drove in. My experience earlier in the morning, specifically the thing with the sideways pickup truck, had made me careful about driving into things I couldn't back out of easily. The property looked empty, nothing moving. Both trucks in the bay were there. A light was on in the office window. I drove in slowly, turned the truck so it was pointed back at the gate, and sat there. Then I got out and pulled the gate closed behind me. There was a chain and padlock on the post, and I threaded it through and locked it. Then I heard something from the office building. I stood there with my hand still on the chain and listened. The sound was indistinct through the concrete block walls, but it was clearly voices, more than one. Something dropped. Not broken, just knocked over. That dull, hollow thump of something plastic hitting a tile floor. Then a voice saying something, sharp and quiet. The tone of someone telling someone else to be still. I walked to the office door and knocked. 3 solid knocks with my knuckle. Silence. "I'm a line tech," I said to the door. "Garrett Holt, with Mid-South Utility. I was working on County Road 20 this morning when everything went wrong. I'm alone. I just locked the front gate. If somebody's in there, now would be a good time to say so." 15 seconds of silence. Then a woman's voice from behind the door. "You one of them?" I almost laughed. Almost. "No. I drove here." I'm standing here talking to you. People have been coming in from the road this morning. Some of them were not right. We had to. There were 2 of them, and we locked the door and..." The voice cut off. Someone else was whispering something to her. "Can I come in?" I said. The lock clicked. The door opened. There were 3 of them in the office. Patty Oakes was the one who'd been talking to me through the door, and I recognized her from my previous jobs at this depot. She was the Cherokee Nation communications dispatcher who worked out of this location, a heavy-set woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and a Cherokee Nation employee ID badge clipped to her shirt pocket. She'd worked that office for probably 20 years, I'd guess, and she had the look of someone who had been competent and unflappable their entire professional life, and was currently applying every bit of that competence to a situation that was completely outside its design parameters. The second person was a young man named Brett Nolan, who introduced himself as a lineman's apprentice, 22 years old, who'd driven up from Tahlequah that morning for what was supposed to be a training day. He was thin, around 6 feet, with the beginnings of a beard that suggested he'd been trying to grow one and hadn't quite gotten there yet. He had the specific kind of scared that young men have when they're trying to look like they're not scared, which meant his jaw was set too hard, and he was keeping his hands very still. The third person was a woman who didn't introduce herself for about 5 minutes. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, and a Cherokee Nation road atlas open in her lap, and she was looking at it the way people look at maps when they've already memorized them, but don't want to look at anyone else in the room. Eventually, she looked up and said her name was Nora Whitfield. She'd been driving to Tahlequah from Stillwell for a district teachers meeting that morning when she'd had to stop because of something on the road. She said it flat, the something on the road part, not explaining further, and I didn't push. She was wearing a long-sleeved thermal undershirt under an open button-down flannel shirt, and the left sleeve of the thermal was pushed down to her wrist, even though it wasn't cold in the office. I didn't notice that yet, not consciously, but I noticed it. "Hank?" I said to Patty. "Hank Clearwater still work out of this depot?" "He was here this morning," Patty said. "He went out about an hour before you got here, took the smaller truck, went south toward the main road. He said he was going to check on something. He said..." She stopped. "He said he'd be back." "Okay," I said. "He'll be back," she said. "Okay," I said again, and meant it. I looked around the office. It was a standard utility company field office. Desk, radio console, 2 computers, filing cabinets, a folding table against one wall that had coffee supplies on it, and some kind of potluck remnants from someone's lunch. A corkboard on the wall, with work orders and a duty roster, and on the far wall, a metal cabinet with a padlock on it, the kind of cabinet that typically holds keys. I had a crowbar in my truck, just something I kept back there with the rest of the tools. But Patty had keys to the cabinet, and when she opened it, we found what I'd hoped for. Keys for the 2 work trucks in the bay, keys for the storage building, and a set of keys labeled in small block letters, "Radio Room," with an arrow pointing to a door in the back wall that I hadn't tried yet. She hadn't known there was a radio room. She'd been working this depot for years, and she hadn't known about it. It was marked on a laminated facility map inside the cabinet, Com Relay Station B, and when we went back there, it was a room about 10 feet by 12 feet, windowless, with a stack of radio equipment on a metal rack, and a workbench running along one wall. Most of it was older gear. Some of it was older than me, but there was a VHF base station that looked maintained, a bank of batteries, and a small inverter, the kind of setup you'd put in as emergency backup for a communications node. I stood there in that room, and something in my chest did a very specific kind of settling, like a knot going 2/3 loose. It didn't solve anything, but it was something. "I can get this working," I said. Brett was standing in the doorway. He looked at the equipment. "What for?" "To find out how bad it is." He looked at me. "I think I already know how bad it is." "Me too," I said, "but I want to hear it from somebody else." It took me about 90 minutes to get the VHF station running, most of which was spent chasing down why the inverter wasn't converting properly. which turned out to be a loose connection on the battery bank that was simple to fix once I found it. The equipment came alive piece by piece, the way older electronics do. A little reluctant at first, a flicker, a hum, and then settling into steady operation. I started scanning frequencies. There were signals. That was the first thing I can say with certainty. There were signals on the air. It wasn't quiet the way a completely failed infrastructure sounds. But what I was hearing was fragmentary and scattered, and most of it was confusing. On the public safety mutual aid channels, I got pieces of transmissions, not conversation, more like individual transmissions that had stopped mid-sentence and were just sitting there looping or had gone quiet. On one frequency, I could hear a siren in the background of a dead open mic. On another, there was a man's voice, calm and measured, repeating the same 3 sentences on a loop. This is Wagoner County Emergency Management. The county shelter at Wagoner Fairgrounds is closed. Do not approach the fairgrounds. 3 sentences. Looping. Either automated or the man had gone somewhere and left his mic keyed. On the NOAA weather radio, I got the automated broadcast, which was still running, still describing weather conditions in a completely normal voice as though nothing had happened. On the amateur radio bands, this took longer to reach because I had to adjust the VHF unit to cover part of the ham spectrum. I got actual people talking, actual back and forth. It was patchy, and some of it was in languages I didn't recognize, but there were English speakers. I wrote down what I was hearing in my work tablet because I didn't want to lose track of it. Anyone in the Tulsa metro, do not attempt. I say again, do not attempt. To reach the hospital is compromised. The entire Rogers County. Anyone in Rogers County. I'm at grid reference. Static. Listening on this frequency. They don't die. You have to understand. They don't die unless you. Static. It's everywhere. Not just here. My brother in Kansas City says they have the same. My brother in. This is K5WXR in Muskogee. I've been on air for about 6 hours. If anyone can hear this, I have medical supplies and I wrote that last one down twice. K5WXR, Muskogee. I tried calling back, but I wasn't getting out well on the amateur frequencies. The antenna setup in this room was optimized for UHF, and my improvised reach into the ham bands wasn't efficient. I made a note to rig a better antenna if I could find the wire. The picture that was building from an hour of listening was not good. The thing wasn't local. It wasn't even regional in the way I'd been half hoping. The half of me that thought maybe this was a Tahlequah-specific problem, a cluster event that would get contained. What I was hearing suggested something else. The fragments pointed in every direction. Tulsa, Kansas City, something about St. Louis. A voice that said Atlanta before cutting out. Patty was standing in the doorway of the radio room when I turned around. She'd been there for a while. "Bigger than we thought," I said. She looked at the radio equipment for a moment. "Hank would want to know about that station in Muskogee." "Yeah," I said, "when he gets back." She looked at me, and I looked back at her, and neither of us said what we were both thinking. Hank Clearwater came back about 4 in the afternoon. We heard the truck on the gravel access road, and Brett went to the window and said, "It's the depot truck," and I went and unlocked the gate to let him in. Hank was alone. He drove in slowly, parked the truck in the bay, and sat there for a moment before getting out. I can't tell you what he was doing in that moment. Maybe nothing. Maybe he just needed a second. But when he came out, he looked like a man who'd seen something he was still organizing inside his head. He was in his early 60s. I'd met him twice before, and remembered him as a quiet, direct man. The kind of man who doesn't talk much, but when he talks, things happen. Cherokee Nation employee badge, standard issue work clothes, a gray and black beard that was kept neat. He shook my hand and said, "Holt, good you're here. Good you're back," I said, and I meant it the way Patty had meant it earlier when she'd said it. He'd driven south toward the main road and gotten close enough to see the edge of Tahlequah from a hill viewpoint before turning back. He described what he saw with the flat economy of a man reporting a work situation. Roughly 200 to 300 infected visible in the commercial district and the road corridor, moving through freely, no containment apparent, several fires burning. The police station parking lot had vehicles in it, but no visible personnel. The National Guard armory on the south side of town. The gate was open. Armed? Patty asked. Some, Hank said. Most just walking. A few were running, kind of. Not really running. Moving faster than the others. He paused. I don't know if that means something. It probably did mean something, but I didn't know what yet. Then Hank said something I wasn't expecting. He said, I stopped at my cousin's place on the way back, on the road south. The small house on the hill. The white fence. You know the one. Patty nodded. Nobody there, Hank said. That was all he said about it. He went and got a cup of cold coffee from the pot in the main office and sat down at the folding table and started reading a topographical map he'd taken from the truck's glove box. I got the feeling that this was how he processed things, not by talking about them, but by finding the next practical thing and focusing on it. I went back to the radio room. We lost Nora on day 2. I need to say that plainly, and then I'll explain what I mean by it, because the way I say it makes it sound like she died, and that's not what happened on day 2. But we lost her in the way that matters, and the rest came later. The morning of day 2, I was up early. I don't think any of us slept much. We'd settled into the office building for the night, with the furniture pushed against the doors, and everyone taking turns at the window, and the night had been mostly quiet, except for a sound around 3 a.m. that I still can't fully explain. It came from the road below the access road, the county road we'd come in on. A sound like a large group of people walking, the soft shuffle and thump of feet, but sustained. Not a few people, not even a dozen, more like a crowd, moving west to east. We'd sat in the dark and listened to it pass, and none of us had said anything. It faded after about 20 minutes and didn't return. But in the morning light, when I went to the gate and looked down the gravel road to where it joined the county road, I could see the tire marks and the gravel disturbance from something that had moved through there. Not just footprints. There were marks like something had been dragged, and there was a child's shoe in the ditch at the road junction, a small sneaker, green with a Velcro strap. I came back and didn't tell anyone about the shoe. Nora was quiet that morning in a specific way. She'd been quiet the whole time. But day 2 quiet was different. Patty had made oatmeal on a small propane camp stove she'd found in the storage building, and we were eating it at the folding table, and Nora ate maybe 4 bites, and then put her bowl down and just sat there. Her left arm was on the table and she had it drawn toward her, elbow bent, hand close to her chest. Brett was the one who noticed. He said, "Your arm okay?" Not particularly suspicious, just casual. She looked at him. She said, "Yeah, you're holding it funny." Silence that lasted probably 3 seconds, which doesn't sound long, but try counting to 3 in a room where nobody is talking. "I bumped it," she said. Patty looked at her. I looked at her. Hank didn't look up from his map. "When?" Brett asked. He wasn't being cruel. He was 22 and hadn't learned yet when to stop asking things. Nora didn't answer right away. She looked at the table. Then she looked up at me. Why me? I don't know. Maybe I was the person in the room she'd decided was going to handle things. And she said, "I need to tell you something." She'd been bitten on the forearm. She'd been bitten when she stopped her car on the county road that morning before she made it to the depot, when she'd gotten out to try to help what she'd thought was a person sitting against a fence post. It was when I heard that detail, the person sitting against a fence post, that I registered she'd been bitten before she even got here. She'd been bitten before any of us ever saw her face. The bite was bad. I made her show it to us, and what was under that sleeve was already doing what bites do. Already tracking up the arm in those dark lines that mean infection is moving. She'd cleaned it and wrapped it with a first aid kit from her car. And she'd sat in this office building for 2 days knowing. We sat there. Patty was the one who said anything first. She said, "You should have told us." "I know," Nora said. "We have been in the same room with you for 2 days." "I know, I'm sorry." Hank looked up from his map for the first time. He looked at Nora's arm. He looked at her face. He said, "How do you feel right now?" She thought about it. "Hot," she said. "My head hurts. The arm. She stopped. The arm is bad. Brett had pushed his chair back. I understood the impulse. I had the same one, but I kept myself in my seat because I needed to think clearly, and moving backward was not thinking clearly. I said, has anyone turned into one of those things in a way we can observe, where we know the timeline? Nobody said anything useful. We'd all seen it happen, but from a distance, in passing, without knowing the before. We talked. It took about an hour, which sounds like a long time to talk about something with such an obvious practical dimension. But the practical dimension was the last thing anyone wanted to get to, and humans will talk around things like that for as long as possible. What we eventually agreed on, what I eventually said plainly because nobody else was going to, was that we had to separate Nora from the group while we still could, while she was still herself. There was a storage room in the back of the equipment building that could be locked from the outside. Nora heard all of this. She wasn't upset. Or maybe she was past being upset. I don't know. She'd been sitting with this for 2 days. Whatever she needed to do with it emotionally, she'd maybe already done most of it in private. She said, "Okay. We'll keep checking on you," Patty said. "You shouldn't," Nora said, not angrily, just practical. "If it gets bad quick, you shouldn't open that door." She took the road atlas she'd been reading, a water bottle, a granola bar from Patty's purse. She walked to the storage room without anyone helping her walk, without leaning on anything. She sat down on a folded moving blanket that Brett had put in there, and she looked at us through the open door, and she said, "Did any of you ever think about how much of regular life is just waiting for the next thing?" None of us answered. "Okay," she said again. "Close the door." We heard her crying for about an hour after we closed it. Not loud, the kind of crying you do when you're trying not to be heard. And then we didn't hear her anymore. I don't know exactly when she turned. I don't know how fast it happened. But the thing that spent the next 2 days making noise in that storage room was not Nora Whitfield. I knew that because Nora Whitfield had been quiet in a particular way, contained, careful. And whatever was in that room wasn't quiet and wasn't careful. It moved and hit the walls and made sounds that didn't have anything to do with language. And eventually it went quiet too. I never opened that door. I want to say that clearly. None of us did. We moved all of our supplies out of the storage building before she turned. And after she went quiet, we left the building, and we never went back to that particular storage room. Whatever is in there now, I'll just say that Nora Whitfield deserved better, and we did the best we could with what we had, and those two things are both true, and I think about them at the same time fairly often. Day 3 started with Hank and me sitting on the roof of the office building in the early morning, drinking water because the propane was running low and we were rationing the coffee. Hank had brought the topographical map up with him, and it was open between us, weighted at the corners with 2 bolts from my tool belt. He'd been looking at this map since he got back the day before. "You know this area well?" I asked. "I've worked this land for 30 years, he said. Not boastful, just stating a fact the way you'd state that water is wet. "What are we looking at?" I nodded at the map. But he put his finger on a spot in the hills to the northeast. Old agricultural cooperative, built in the mid-70s. Cherokee Nation leased it until maybe 1990, then it sat unused. He traced a road with his finger that wasn't on the main county road system, more of a private track. "It's up on a ridge. Elevation advantage. River access. About a quarter-mile down the slope. It has a grain storage building, a main building, 2 smaller outbuildings, chain-link fence that we put up when we were using it. May or may not still be intact. You've been there since 1990? I've been nearby. I know approximately what it looks like." He paused. "It's isolated. The road that gets you there isn't on most maps. It's not a place most people would find." I looked at the map. The spot he was pointing to was about 18 miles northeast of our current location, deep in the Ozark foothills. I could see the river line snaking through the topography. The elevation lines were tight up there. Steep terrain, which meant dense forest. Hard to move through in large numbers. "We'd have to move," I said. "Yes. We have 2 trucks. We have some supplies. We have a radio I'm not going to be able to take all of." "Take what matters," he said. I looked at the map. What else do we need that we don't have? He thought for a moment. Food. We have 3 days' worth of what's in that office. Maybe 4 if we're careful. Medical supplies. Patty needs... He stopped, glanced at me. I nodded. I already knew about Patty's insulin. She'd told me the previous day, straightforwardly, the way she handled most things. She had type 2. She managed it with insulin. She had what was currently with her. She'd had her supplies in her purse because she always carried a day's worth, and she'd had a partial backup supply in the office refrigerator, which was running off the same generator we were using. She had enough insulin for roughly 8 more days if she was strict about rationing and careful about what she was eating. After that, she'd said, "There's a pharmacy in Stillwell, 12 miles south." I'd said, "We'll figure it out." She'd looked at me with the specific patience of a woman who has been told, "We'll figure it out," by men her whole life, and has learned exactly how much that phrase is worth. And I'd said, "No, I mean it. We're going to figure it out." Day 3. Now on the roof with Hank. I said, "Stillwell Pharmacy. We need to do a run." "Stillwell is going to be bad," he said. "I know. You know the main road through Stillwell?" "Highway 100, yeah. There's a back way," he said, and put his finger back on the map. The supply run to Stillwell was Brett and me. Hank stayed at the depot with Patty. We took the smaller of the 2 depot trucks because it was lighter and quicker, and we loaded the bed with empty storage bins, and I took my full toolkit and a length of chain and a come-along, and my bolt cutters, because I've learned through 11 years of field work that those 4 things can solve an enormous number of problems. I also took the fire axe from the wall of the equipment building. The back way Hank had pointed out on the map wasn't a road, exactly. It was a series of connecting tracks. Farm access lanes, old timber roads, one stretch that crossed a dry creek bed where I had to get out and check the crossing on foot before I was willing to drive across it. It added about 4 miles to the direct route, but it kept us off the main highway corridors. We saw exactly 1 infected on those back roads. A man in overalls standing in the middle of a hayfield with no apparent destination, moving in a slow circle. He didn't react to us because we were far enough away and driving slowly enough that the engine noise didn't carry to him. We watched him turn and turn in that field as we moved past, and Brett watched him for a long time after we'd gone by. "Do you think he knows?" Brett said. "Knows what? Where he is? Who he was?" "No," I said. Brett was quiet for a while. Then, "That's worse." Stillwell from the back approach came in through a residential neighborhood on the northeast edge of town. I stopped on a ridge, and we sat there and used my binoculars, work binoculars, the ones I used for checking line conditions from distance, to look at the town center. What we saw was enough infected in the main commercial area to make a direct drive-through inadvisable. But the pharmacy was on the east edge of town, technically, not the center. It was a standalone building with a drive-through window, the kind that probably used to be a fast food place before it got converted. It had a small parking lot. From our vantage point, I could see maybe 3 or 4 figures in the parking lot, moving without purpose. "We go in from the residential side," I said. "Park behind the building. I go in through the back. You stay in the truck with it running. 5 minutes. I come out, we go." Brett said, "What if—" "5 minutes," I said. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, you go without me." He didn't say anything to that. I said, "I mean it, Brett, 5 minutes." "Okay," he said. He didn't sound sure, but he said it. We came in from the residential side, slow, lights off even though it was daylight, because I didn't want the brake lights drawing anything looking out a window. The back of the pharmacy had a loading dock and a steel door with a push bar. Steel doors with push bars are security theater. They're designed to keep you from coming in from outside, but if you get inside the building some other way, you can exit through them easily. A push bar is not a deadbolt. What I actually needed was to get in, which meant the door itself was a problem. What solved it was the drive-through window. The drive-through window was on the side of the building facing the parking lot, and there were 2 of those infected moving around the front of the lot that might have seen me if I'd gone around that way. But the window itself was on the passenger side of the building, sort of tucked, and there was a big pharmacy sign on a pole that blocked the sight line from the lot. I got out of the truck, went low, got to the window in about 4 seconds. The window was the standard pharmacy drive-through type, sliding glass in an aluminum track. I took the flat end of my pry bar, slid it under the track lip, and pushed. The aluminum bent. The glass moved. I pushed harder, and the whole frame popped out of its groove, and I was through. Inside a pharmacy when nobody has been there for 3 days and the power is on still from a generator, but the AC isn't running properly anymore, it smells like the cleaning products are slowly winning a battle against everything else. Clean and wrong at the same time. The lights were on, fluorescent, the full-on clinical brightness of a place designed for reading labels. Behind the pharmacy counter, everything was organized the way pharmacists organize things, which is meticulously and according to a system I don't fully understand. I went over the counter, just stepped up on the counter and over. I didn't try to find a gate, and went straight to the refrigerated section. Insulin comes in multiple types and brands, and I didn't know specifically what Patty used. I knew it was refrigerated. I grabbed everything refrigerated in that section that looked like it was what I was looking for. 8 vials, a mix of whatever they had, plus syringes. Plus I found a case of alcohol wipes on a shelf and grabbed that. I also grabbed every antibiotic I could identify, every pain medication, wound care supplies, a blood glucose monitor kit, a blood pressure monitor. I loaded everything into a large paper bag from behind the counter, and then went to the front of the pharmacy and grabbed 2 more bags of general first aid stuff, gauze, tape, elastic bandages, SAM splints, and loaded those up too. I was at the drive-through window heading back out when I heard the sound from the front of the store. One of them had come in through the front door, which I now saw had been standing open. The automatic door opener was still running, and the door was just open, and apparently had been the whole time. I could hear the soft foot drag of its walking, the specific heel-toe shuffle of something that doesn't quite lift its feet properly anymore, and it was coming down the aisle toward the pharmacy counter. I had the bags. I was at the window. I went through it backward, careful not to drop anything, and hit the pavement and ran back to the truck, and Brett had it in gear before I was fully in the door, and I pulled it shut while we were already moving. We made it 3 blocks before I started breathing normally again. "Good?" Brett said. "Got it," I said. I sat there holding the bags in my lap. My hands were not quite steady. "You want me to drive for a while?" Brett said. "I've got it," I said. Then I laughed. I don't know why. Not because anything was funny. It just came out. Brett looked at me. Then he laughed too. We drove back to the depot through the back roads laughing, and neither of us could have explained what the joke was. I need to tell you about the thing with the hazmat suit, because it doesn't make sense, and I've been trying to make it make sense for a while now. Day 3, about 2 hours after we got back from Stillwell. I was out near the gate doing a perimeter check. I'd started doing those twice a day, just walking the inside of the fence line and checking for any compromise, or any sign of activity near the access road. Hank came with me most times. This time I went alone because Hank was helping Patty understand the insulin labels we'd brought back, and Brett was doing the same perimeter check on the other side of the property. I was near the northeast corner of the fence, where the chain link butts up against some scrub brush and a couple of Osage orange trees, when I saw the shape in the trees. It was about 30 feet beyond the fence, standing, not moving. I stopped. My hand went to the fire axe handle. It was clipped to my belt by then, sitting right side low where I could pull it. I looked at the shape. It was wearing a suit. That was the first thing that registered. A proper hazmat or protective suit of some kind. White or cream-colored, the full-body kind with a hood, and a face shield that had been cracked on one side. The suit was dirty, scuffed along one leg, and there was a rip in the left arm that showed something dark underneath. The thing wearing the suit wasn't alive. It was standing there, the way infected stand when they're not moving toward anything specific, just upright, head slightly forward, that slack posture that looks wrong even from a distance. It was a person who had died and was still standing. But it had been wearing a hazmat suit when it died. I stood at my fence line and looked at it for a long moment. It didn't react to me. I hadn't made any sound. I stood very still, and I looked at that suit, and I thought, someone was already responding to this, before it went public, before the radio went quiet, Someone was already on the ground out here, in Cherokee Nation land east of Tahlequah, Oklahoma, in a protective suit responding to something they were afraid of catching. And they hadn't made it. I went and got Brett and brought him back to look. He didn't say anything for a while either. CDC, he said. Or FEMA. Or something military. I can't see any markings from here. You going outside the fence to look? No. Then we don't know. We know someone was already here, I said. Before us. Someone with equipment and training and proper gear. And they got infected anyway. Brett looked at the shape for another moment. Then he said, maybe they got overwhelmed. Maybe there were just too many at once. Maybe, I said. We watched it stand there for another minute. It didn't move. Then we went back inside, and I told Hank what we'd seen. Hank's face went very still while I was talking. It stayed still for a few seconds after I finished. That kind of suit, he said. That's not the kind of thing you send when you think you might have a problem. That's the kind you send when you know you have a problem. I said, yeah. He went back to the map. Day 4 brought the signal I still can't fully explain. I'd been running the radio in 2-hour blocks because we had to be careful about battery drain, and during my evening block I was scanning through frequencies methodically. I'd made a list of the ones worth checking regularly, when I came across something on a frequency I hadn't tried before. It was above the standard ham band, up in a range that's technically used for government and military fixed operations, and I shouldn't have been able to receive it well with the antenna I was running. But I picked it up, broken and partial, signal fading in and out. What I heard was a voice reading numbers. Not a code, not a broadcast, just numbers in groups, like 714-429-783, pause, 714-429-783, pause, different set, 896-211-447. It went on. Different sets, each repeated twice. I wrote them all down. Then it said something that wasn't numbers. It said, and I wrote this down twice, to make sure I had it right. Window is closing. Sequence alpha to repeat at 0600. Confirm last known positions. And then the numbers again. It repeated for about 40 minutes, and then stopped. I sat there looking at my notes. Hank had come into the radio room about 20 minutes in, and he sat across from me and listened too. And when it went silent, he looked at my notes. Coordinates? He said. Could be. Or inventory codes. Or something else entirely. I looked at the groups. If they're coordinates, they're not in a format I know. Not standard latitude/longitude. Military uses different systems, Hank said. We looked at each other. Confirm last known positions, I said. That sounds like someone tracking something. Or someone. Or groups of someones, Hank said. I thought about that for the rest of the night. Day 5 was the day we decided to move. And before we moved, I want to talk about what we'd been eating, because that part of survival, the boring, practical, constant part, is something people don't think about until they're in it. What we had at the depot was the oatmeal and the few cans from Patty's office supplies. She'd had a small stash of things in her desk drawers, the way people who eat lunch at their desks tend to accumulate. Instant soup packets, peanut butter crackers, a bag of mixed nuts, some hard candy, a case and a half of water bottles from the storage building, some emergency supplies in the larger truck's cab. Every work truck in Cherokee Nation carried an emergency kit, Hank told us, basic food items included. And what we'd brought back from Stillwell, I'd grabbed food while in the pharmacy, mostly shelf-stable things near the front counter, 2 big bags of trail mix, several protein bar boxes, some crackers. What we didn't have was enough of any of that for 4 people for more than a few more days. We'd also found, and this matters more than anything from the pharmacy in terms of long-term survival, a full set of fishing gear in the back of the smaller truck. Rods, tackle box, a small net. Hank had put it there. He said he sometimes fished the river at lunch when he was working jobs in this area. The river at the base location? I asked. Good fishing, he said. It was also a drinkable water source, if you had the right tablets to treat it, which we did. I'd grabbed water purification tablets from the camping section of a True Value hardware store I passed through on the way to the depot on day 0. I'd grabbed them without knowing why, pure instinct, shoving them in my jacket pocket as I ran through the store. Instinct is sometimes exactly right. Protein from the river, clean water from the river. The cooperative's outbuildings might have seed stores, might have growing space, might have preserving equipment. The elevated position gave us sight lines that this depot didn't have, and the depot was getting uncomfortable. On the evening of day 4, something had come down the access road and stood at the gate for about an hour. Just one of them, alone, standing at the chain link with its hands loose at its sides, pressing its face against the wire. It wasn't attracted to anything particular. No sound we'd made, because we'd been inside and quiet. It just found the gate the way water finds the lowest path, following the disturbance of where we'd been walking, probably. It wasn't threatening, exactly. One infected at a gate is manageable, but one becomes a beacon. Sound draws them, and there's something about one standing still in a fixed spot that eventually draws others. We'd seen that in what we'd been hearing at night. That crowd sound on the road the first night. That had been dozens, maybe 100. Dozens or 100 of them moving together is a different problem entirely. We needed to move. Hank laid it out on the table with the map and we all looked at it. Patty said 18 miles. Most of it back road, Hank said. My insulin needs refrigeration, she said. Generator, I said. If there's a generator at the cooperative, and I'd bet there is, I can run a refrigerator off it. I looked at her. We'll figure out fuel. She looked at me with that look again. I said, I mean it. I know you mean it, she said. I believe you mean it. Meaning it and doing it are different things. Then we'll do it too, I said. She thought for a moment. Okay, she said. When? Day after tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow we prep. The prep day was the day we found Ruth. I want to be honest. We almost didn't find Ruth, because I almost didn't stop. We'd taken the larger truck down to Tahlequah's eastern edge to do a supply run before the move. The route went past the outskirts anyway, and we could hit a grocery store if we came at it from the right direction, and we had the time. Hank and I went. Brett stayed with Patty. The route Hank chose took us along the edge of town on a back road that passed a veterinary clinic, an insurance office that had already been looted by the look of it, and then a larger building that turned out to be the Cherokee Nation Health Clinic. The clinic had its door blocked with a piece of concrete parking curb. Not stuck, blocked. Somebody had dragged it there deliberately and jammed it under the door handle. The clinic had metal shutters on its windows, the kind that roll down after hours. Those were down on every window. Somebody was in there. I made Hank stop. He looked at the building. We don't have time for. Someone's in there, I said. Look at the curb. Someone blocked that door from the outside to keep things out. He looked. He saw what I saw. He put the truck in park. We knocked. Nothing for 30 seconds. Then a voice, a woman. What do you want? Not really a question. More like a statement that was also a question. We're not infected, I said. We're moving to a safer location tomorrow. If you're in there alone and you're... I'm not alone, the voice said immediately. She was, we eventually discovered. But she said it so fast and so firmly that I think she said it to everyone who came to that door. Her name was Ruth Decker. She was 47, an ER nurse who'd been at the clinic doing a wellness consultation rotation when everything collapsed on Tuesday. She'd spent the first hours of the outbreak getting people out. 2 physicians, a PA, 4 nurses, 6 patients. As many as she could load into cars and get pointed in what she thought was a safe direction. Then she'd come back, locked herself in, and had been managing alone since Tuesday. That was 4 days. She'd been burning through the clinic's medical supplies, making herself as safe as possible. She had proper antibiotic courses, anti-inflammatory medications, a working AED, suture kits. She had a cart in the back that she'd loaded and ready to go. She'd been waiting for something she could trust to move with. She had good instincts. She didn't trust quickly, and she asked us hard questions through the door before she opened it. How many in your group? Where are you going? What do you have? How do you know this location is safe? When I told her about Hank, and his knowledge of the land she asked me to put Hank on. He talked to her for about 3 minutes through the door. I don't know exactly what he said because I was watching the road, but at the end of it, the curb moved, and the door opened, and Ruth Decker came out with a cart full of medical supplies, and a look on her face, like someone who has made a considered decision and is not going back on it. She was shorter than I expected from her voice. She had gray showing at the roots of her dark hair. She'd been a brunette until recently, it looked like, and she moved with the efficient speed of someone who makes quick decisions for a living. She looked at our truck, looked at the back, looked at the cart, looked at me. "How far?" she said. 18 miles, I said. She nodded. She loaded the cart into the truck herself. We also found Kevin that day, though found is generous. Kevin Marsh found us. Coming back from the grocery run, which had gone reasonably well, the store on the east edge of town had been partially picked over, but there were still canned goods on the lower shelves that panic shoppers had passed over, plus a back storeroom that hadn't been touched, and we'd loaded the truck bed with probably 300 pounds of food. We were on our way back north when a pickup truck pulled out of a farm lane and sat in the middle of the road in front of us. I stopped. The truck sat there, engine running, nothing else. After about 15 seconds, the driver's window went down and a hand came out, palm forward. A clear gesture. "Stop, I see you. Don't run." I didn't run. But I also didn't get out. I sat there. The hand withdrew, and then the truck door opened, and a man got out. 40-ish, heavy-set, a feed store cap on his head. He stood beside his truck with both hands visible and said, from about 40 yards, "You all going somewhere?" "Yes," I said out my window. "Somewhere specific?" "Yes," I said. "Can I ask where?" I looked at Hank. Hank looked at the man. "North," I said. "Not specific." The man nodded. "North sounds right," he said. He walked toward us about 10 yards and stopped. He said, "My name's Kevin Marsh. I had a store in Vienna. I've been sitting in that lane since Monday because I drove east on instinct and stopped when I ran out of road. I have fuel. Half a tank, plus 2 5-gallon jugs. I have food from the store. I don't have anyone to go anywhere with." I looked at Hank. Hank said, quiet. "He sounds scared." "Yeah," I said. "Scared is honest," Hank said. I got out of the truck. Kevin Marsh shook my hand with both of his, which told you something about where he was emotionally. He was scared in the way Hank said, honestly, visibly, not trying to hide it. He had rings under his eyes that said he hadn't slept in 4 days. He smelled like he'd been living in that truck cab. He had food in coolers in his truck bed, and the 2 fuel cans he'd mentioned, and a shotgun he told me about immediately, before I asked, which also told you something. "You'll follow us?" I said. "We move tomorrow." "Convoy?" "Yes," he said. "God, yes." Todd Parrish arrived at the depot gate that evening. He walked up the access road on foot. Just walked up. No car. No visible supplies other than a small pack on his back. He came to the gate and stood there, and Patty saw him from the window and came to get me. He was about 38, I'd guess. Average height, fit in a way that looked functional rather than deliberate. The kind of fit that comes from work rather than a gym. Brown hair, a few days of stubble. He wore clothes that were generic outdoor brand, the kind of thing you buy at Target rather than REI. Clean, relatively. Which was the first odd thing. 3 days into the world falling apart, he was relatively clean. He said his name was Todd Parrish. He was from Tulsa. He'd driven as far east as he could before his truck had broken down, and he'd walked from a point about 6 miles south of us since this morning. 6 miles was plausible. It would take most of a day on back roads if you were being careful. Hank asked him about the truck, make, model, where it was. Todd's answer was specific and consistent with what you'd expect. I watched Hank listen to it. We let him in. He was polite, helpful when asked to do things. He ate the food we gave him and thanked us twice, which was once more than necessary. He slept in the corner of the office building and snored slightly, and otherwise did everything you'd want a newcomer to do. I didn't sleep well that night. I turned over what bothered me about Todd Parrish while lying in the dark, and I couldn't pin it down specifically. It was something like he was too steady. Everyone else in our group had visible cracks. Patty's careful management of her fear, Brett's over-controlled jaw, Ruth's efficient purposefulness that was doing real emotional work underneath, Kevin's barely contained relief at not being alone anymore. Hank was different, but Hank was Hank. And Hank had been in this land for 30 years and had a relationship with hard things that was different from anyone else here. Todd just seemed fine, and 3 days into this, fine was a kind of lie. But I had no evidence, just an uneasiness. I filed it. Morning of day 6 and we moved. Loading the convoy took about 2 hours. We had 3 vehicles. The large depot truck, a heavy-duty 4x4 crew cab, the smaller depot truck, and Kevin's pickup. I drove the large truck with Hank navigating. Ruth rode with Brett in the smaller truck. Kevin drove his own pickup, and Todd rode with Kevin, because I put him there. Patty rode with me. The load, all of the food we'd gathered, the medical supplies from Ruth's clinic cart, our tools, my full kit, plus the depot's tool inventory which I'd inventoried the day before and was genuinely good. They had come-alongs, chainsaws, hydraulic spreaders, a portable generator, and a smaller inverter, fuel cans, welding equipment, all of Hank's maps, the radio equipment I could carry. The base station was too heavy, but I took the VHF handhelds, a portable scanner, and a small HF transceiver that looked salvageable, food for 3 weeks at current headcount, water purification supplies, the medical supplies, tools for construction and repair. We left at first light. The route Hank gave me from the map was quiet for the first 6 miles. The back roads I knew. We were on the same networks I'd been using all week, the farm lanes and the timber access tracks. We moved slowly, maybe 25 miles an hour, because I didn't want to push anything on the rough surfaces with this load. The trees were close on both sides for most of it. Morning light was coming down through the canopy in strips. The birds were doing what birds do at dawn, and it was strange to hear it, this completely normal morning bird noise in a world that was not normal anymore. At mile 7, we went through a small community, 10, 12 houses, a post office, a church. It was empty of everything except 2 or 3 infected wandering a parking lot, and one standing on the steps of the church. They tracked the sound of our convoy. We drove through without stopping, and they followed for maybe 200 yards, and then fell back. Hank said, "Don't stop in towns." "I know," I said. "I mean it," he said. I said, "I know, Hank." He went back to the map. The roadblock hit us at mile 11. It was set up across the road. Trees felled across both lanes, not fallen but cut and placed, which meant people with a chainsaw and a plan. On the left side of the road, past the tree line, I could see a camp of some kind. Tarps between trees, a fire ring, vehicles. I stopped the convoy about 100 yards back. Hank said, very quietly, "Let me look at this." 2 people came out of the trees, a man in his 50s and a woman about the same age, both carrying rifles. Not raised, just carried. They walked to the center of the road and stopped. I got out, left the engine running, walked toward them, stopped about 20 feet out. The man said, "Where are you headed?" "North," I said. Specifically, "Why does it matter?" "Because there are 14 of us, and we've been keeping this road for 6 days, and I'd like to know where the traffic is going." I looked at the trees. I thought, 14 people, and you set up a roadblock is not the math of people who want to get somewhere. It's the math of people who've stopped moving and made this their somewhere and are going to defend it. "Agricultural property," I said. "Old Cherokee Nation Cooperative, 18 miles north of Tahlequah, give or take." The man looked at the woman. She said, "Clearwater's place?" I turned and looked at Hank, who had gotten out of the truck. Hank raised a hand at the woman. She raised her hand back. Something passed between them. Recognition, history. "You know these people?" I said. "Patty Crow's girl," Hank said. "She married a Whitlow." I have no idea what the significance of that was, but the roadblock came down. 3 men came out of the trees with chainsaws and shifted the logs to the side of the road in about 10 minutes. The woman, her name was Donna Whitlow, I learned, asked if we had any medical supplies, and I said yes, that Ruth in the second truck was a nurse with real equipment. And something in Donna Whitlow's face changed quickly, and then went controlled again. "We have somebody," she said. "He's bad." Ruth was out of the second truck before I finished relaying that information. What Ruth found in the camp was a man with a deep laceration on his thigh that was infected. Not zombie bite infected, just normally infected. The way cuts get infected when they're not treated properly. And he was running a fever of 103, and had been for 2 days. Ruth spent about an hour with him, cleaned it, started him on antibiotics from her supplies, gave instructions to his wife on dressing changes and fever management. She came back to the truck looking tired, but clean about it. The 14 people at the roadblock camp were not going to come with us. They'd made their choice and their position, and they weren't wrong to make it. They had water from a creek nearby, they had a defensible perimeter, they were organized. But Donna Whitlow pulled me aside before we left and she said, "There's a man in our camp who was not with us at the beginning. He came 3 days ago, said he'd walked from south. He's been helping, but..." She stopped. "But what?" I said. "He asks a lot of questions about where people are going. Not dangerous questions. Just a lot of them. And last night, someone thought they saw him with something that looked like a phone. Or something like a phone. An electronic thing. We don't have cellular signal out here." I looked at her. "He's not with you?" she said. "No," I said. "But we have." I stopped. I thought about Todd Parrish and Kevin's pickup. "Can you describe the man you have?" She did. The description was not Todd. "Might be more than one," she said, flatly, like a fact. I thanked her, got back in the truck. I sat in the driver's seat for 30 seconds before starting the engine. Hank looked at me. "Problem?" he said. "Maybe," I said. "Drive." The forest road that Hank had mapped took us off anything paved about 4 miles past the roadblock, and we were in the hills proper after that. I'm talking about real eastern Oklahoma Ozark terrain. Rocky, steep, the road, if you can call it that. Following contour lines around hillsides rather than going up and over them, running through creek beds that weren't deep, but whose crossings made the truck dip and lurch and test everything in the bed. The tree canopy was thick enough that from the air you wouldn't have seen us at all. Brett's truck had trouble with one of the creek crossings. His front right tire went off the crossing rocks and sank into soft creek bottom, and we had to winch him out with the come-along, which took about 45 minutes of sweating and cable management. Nobody complained. 45 minutes was 45 minutes, and then we were moving again. We saw something in the forest. I want to be precise about this because it's not something I have a clean explanation for, and I don't like leaving things unexplained. We were on a hillside stretch, moving northwest. The road cut into the side of the hill, with the slope going up to our right and falling away to our left. Through the trees on the left I could see a valley below us, and in the valley there was movement, a lot of it. I slowed to a stop. Hank was looking the same direction. Below us in the valley, through the trees, was a mass of infected, not dozens, not what we'd seen on the roads. This was hundreds, maybe more than hundreds, moving together, not quickly, not in a directed way, but together, the whole mass, drifting slowly northeast, like a slow current. They covered the valley floor completely in the sections I could see, making a noise, not screaming, not moaning the way movies suggest, just a low, continuous sound, like the crowd noise from a stadium at a great distance. That white noise of too many things, making small sounds at once. None of them were looking up. None of them were looking in our direction. I drove very slowly. I kept the engine at the lowest possible RPM. The road ahead curved around the hillside, and eventually, we moved out of sight of the valley, and the convoy moved on. I looked in my mirror. Brett's truck behind me. Kevin's pickup behind that. Nobody moving wrong. "How many do you think that was?" I said to Hank. He was quiet for a long time. Then, more than I expected. "Yeah," I said. "Me too." Where was that mass going? What draws a group that large in a single direction? I've thought about it since. Maybe nothing draws them specifically. Maybe they just cluster at density and move at the trailing edge. Or maybe something attracts them over long distances that we don't understand yet. I don't know. What I know is that they were moving northeast, and we were also moving northeast, and I drove faster after that. The hunting camp was something Hank knew about and mentioned when we were about 3 miles out from the cooperative. He directed us down a side track to it. A deer hunting blind and a small camp structure. Solid logs, built into the side of a ridge. It had a padlocked storage cache buried to the side of it, and Hank had the lock combination in his memory, the way people who work land keep certain things. Just held there, filed under useful. Inside the cache, ammunition, 2 rifles in protective cases, canned food, about 40 cans, water purification filters, a first aid kit, a propane camp stove with 4 extra canisters. "Whose is this?" Kevin asked. "Cherokee Nation Emergency Supply," Hank said. "We put these out 10 years ago after an ice storm stranded some maintenance crews. I placed about 8 of them. I know where 7 of them are." 7 of them. I looked at Hank. He said, "We'll visit the others as we need to." I want to tell you what it felt like to stand in front of that cache. Not triumphant, not relieved in any clean way. More like the specific feeling you get when you've been carrying a heavy weight for a long time, and you set it down, and you realize how heavy it was only after it's not in your hands anymore. 7 supply caches. A man who knew where every one of them was. That knowledge was worth more than everything in the depot combined. Todd Parrish looked at the cache contents with a specific kind of attention that I noticed and filed. We spent 2 hours at the camp. We ate actual hot food. Ruth heated up soup from the cache cans on the propane stove, and it tasted better than anything I can remember. We all ate quietly. The forest around us was wind and birds and nothing else. It was the most peaceful 2 hours since Tuesday morning. Then we drove the last 3 miles to the cooperative. The cooperative was real. I mean that in the sense that sometimes when you've been working towards something during hard circumstances, you arrive and it turns out to be less than you hoped, or more complicated than expected. This wasn't. It was approximately what Hank had described, and what I'd imagined from the map, and what I'd been holding in my head as our destination was accurate. It sat on a ridge, exactly like Hank said. The main building was a long concrete block structure, 70s construction, solid and low, with a metal roof that had been repaired at some point and still seemed watertight. The grain storage was 2 metal silos at the back of the property, plus a flat-roofed storage building between them that had wooden shelving inside and some old cooperative signage still on the walls. 2 smaller outbuildings, one that had been a workshop, one a garage of some kind. The chain-link fence Hank had mentioned was there, 8 feet. Same 3 strands of barbed wire on top as the depot, but here it ran the full perimeter of the ridge pad, maybe 2 acres inside the wire. The gate needed a new chain and padlock, which I had, and 2 of the fence sections had gap issues that would take maybe 2 hours each to properly fix. The ridge gave us about 200 yards of open sightline in every direction before the forest began again. The valley below was visible from the north side. We could see the road we'd come in on for about a mile. Nobody coming up that road was going to surprise us. The river Hank had mentioned was real. I could see it from the fence line, down the slope through the trees, maybe a quarter mile, maybe slightly more. A proper river, the Illinois, one of the cleanest in the state before all this, and presumably still clean, since no one was upstream dumping things into it anymore. We drove through the gate and sat there in our 3 vehicles for a moment, engines off. The silence of the place came down. Wind in the trees on the slope, the specific sound of high ground. It's different from valley sound. More exposure. You hear more sky in it, if that makes sense. Patty said, "This will do." We spent the first 2 days at the cooperative doing what needed doing immediately and saving everything else. First thing, I checked the generator. There was a Generac unit in the workshop building, diesel-fueled, probably from the late 90s. I went through it properly. Fuel filter, oil, spark plugs. It needed oil, and the fuel in the tank was old, but we had diesel in our convoy, and I cleaned the old fuel out and refueled it, and it started on the 3rd pull. Not quiet, but running. With the generator running, I got the main building's lights working, found an ancient refrigeration unit in what had been the cooperative's small break room, and got that running too. Patty's insulin went into it within 4 hours of our arrival. Second thing, water. We couldn't pipe from the river without infrastructure I didn't have, but we could carry. 4 people making 2 trips a day with 5-gallon containers would give us 40 gallons a day, which was tight but workable with discipline. I set up a gravity filtration system using the filter equipment from Ruth's Medical Supplies plus some materials I found in the workshop, and we had clean water within 24 hours. Third thing, the fence. Brett and I spent most of the first day on the fence, working our way around the perimeter, fixing gaps, reinforcing weak posts. Kevin helped. Hank directed. By the end of day 1 inside the fence, the perimeter was solid. Fourth thing, watch schedule. 3 windows in the main building gave views to 3 sides. The north wall had a flat roof section we could access through a maintenance hatch, giving the 4th view. 4 people awake and watching at any given time, rotating through the night in 3-hour shifts. Everyone was in the rotation, including Patty, including Kevin. Food. We inventoried everything we'd brought and what the cooperative had. In the storage building we found equipment, not food. The old cooperative had been a distribution point for farming supplies rather than a storage facility for food itself. But the shelving units were there, and the space was there, and that was going to matter. What we actually had to eat, the canned goods from the Stillwell grocery run, the cache contents from the hunting camp, the food Kevin had brought from his store, and whatever could be gathered or grown. Hank pointed to the workshop and said there would be seed stock in there somewhere, and he was right. 3 sealed buckets of various garden seeds, the prepper emergency variety that lasts for years, had been sitting on a back shelf since God knows when. We'd plant in spring. It was October now. We needed to get to spring. The river was going to help. Brett turned out to be a genuinely good fisher. He'd grown up doing it, he said, his dad's thing. And the second evening here, he came back from the river with 6 catfish that Ruth fried in a pan on the propane stove, while I was working on the radio setup in the main building. The smell of fish frying cut through everything else, and for about 20 minutes, the cooperative smelled like something that had nothing to do with the world falling apart. I sat in the main room eating catfish and crackers, and I thought about my sister in Tulsa. I thought about her apartment on the 2nd floor of a building in the Brady Arts District. I thought about whether the building was safe. I thought about whether the building was safe. I thought about the fact that I'd been thinking about this since Tuesday, and thinking about it wasn't going to change anything, and that the only way to make it possible to eventually check on her was to stay alive long enough to have the option. I went back to the radio. I want to talk about Todd because things came to a head on day 15. In the days between arriving at the cooperative and day 15, Todd Parrish had been exactly what you'd want a group member to be. He worked. He didn't complain. He had practical skills. He could handle the chainsaw well, which was useful for the wood cutting we were starting to do for the winter heating situation. And he seemed to understand plumbing well enough to help when I was working on getting the cooperative's old water line functional. He got along with Kevin, who was friendly to everyone. He was respectful to Patty and careful around Ruth. He asked questions. A lot of questions. The kind that seemed like conversation. How far is the river? Have you explored the ridge further north? Is there another road access to this property? How many people can you see from the north fence line? Normal curiosity in a new place, on the surface. But they were specifically geographical and logistical questions. Where are we? Exactly. Who knows we're here? What's our coverage in different directions? On day 14, I was working in the workshop alone, and I found his pack unattended near the door. He'd left it there when he went to help Brett with something outside. I looked at it for probably a full minute. I want to be honest about what I did next. I went through it. I'm not proud of the invasion of it, but I'm not ashamed of the necessity of it. We were 6 people on a ridge in the middle of nowhere during the end of the world, and trust was not something we could afford to distribute freely. Most of what was in the pack was exactly what you'd expect. Clothes, a water bottle, some food, a basic first aid kit, a folded-up Oklahoma road map, well worn, a compact flashlight, and in the bottom of the pack, wrapped in a pair of socks, a small electronic device, about the size of a deck of cards. It had a small LED indicator on one end that was green. It had no visible buttons, no screen, no markings I could identify on the casing, just a smooth black rectangle with a green light. I held it. I turned it over. I put it back in the sock, and put it back in the pack, and put the pack back where I'd found it, and I went to find Hank. Hank looked at it. Ruth looked at it. I described it to Patty and Brett. Kevin looked at me, and then back at the door. "EPIRB," Ruth said. "Emergency position indicating radio beacon. We had them in the ER for mass casualty protocols. They ping a satellite, give your location." "Constantly?" Hank asked. "Depends on the type. Some are triggered, some are automatic. Some have a manual component." She looked at me. "That green light means it's active." We sat with that for a minute. "He's not a survivor who walked up from a broken-down truck," I said. Nobody argued. "Who sent him?" Brett said. Nobody answered that either, because we didn't know, and guessing felt dangerous. What we did instead was wait. We waited until Todd came back to get his pack. He came back about an hour after I'd gone through it, picked it up naturally, didn't check it, and then the next morning I asked him, very casually, if he'd like to come with me to check the north fence line. Just the two of us. He said sure. We walked the fence line. We talked about the cooperative, about the plans we had for it, about the winter. He was easy to talk to, I'll say that. He had a quality of attention that was like listening. He really seemed to hear what you said, which I'd mistaken before for genuine interest in us as people, rather than genuine interest in our information. At the far north corner of the fence, where you could see the furthest down the approach road, I stopped. I said, "What's in the socks in your pack, Todd?" He went still, just for a moment. Then he turned and looked at me, and the quality of his attention changed. It went from warm listener to something else. Not dangerous, just different, like something behind his face had shifted. He said, "I'm not going to pretend I know what you're—" "Don't," I said. "Save yourself the work." He looked at the trees. He looked at the fence. He looked at me. Then he said, "I'm not going to hurt anyone here." "What are you doing?" Long pause. "Trying to make sure you're safe," he said. "From what?" "From people who would disagree with that goal." He looked at me steadily. "I can't tell you more than that. I'm asking you to believe that I'm not your problem." "The signal," I said. "It's broadcasting our location." "To people who are trying to find survivor groups," he said. "Not to cause harm. To—" He stopped. He exhaled. "It's complicated. The people I work with, what they're doing is complicated, and it's not clean, and I understand that. From where you're standing, it looks like something very bad. But I am not your enemy, and the people I'm reporting to are not your enemy. Who are you reporting to?" He didn't answer. I said, "The signal goes silent tonight, or I throw the device in the river." He looked at me. "You can stay," I said. "You're useful. You work. You don't cause problems. But the device goes silent tonight, and you tell me what you know about what's coming. All of it." Another long pause. The wind came up the ridge and moved through the trees, and then stopped. "Okay," he said. "What Todd told me that afternoon, sitting on the north fence post with the trees below us, and the river somewhere under the canopy making its constant sound, was incomplete, and I know it was incomplete. He was careful about what he gave me. He shaped the information the way you'd shape a story to be true, but not complete. But here's what I think I know from it. There were organizations. He didn't say government, didn't say military, just organizations that had known the outbreak was coming. Not exactly when, not exactly where, but the general shape of it. The hazmat suit in the trees at the depot fit this picture. People had been deployed in advance of the public collapse. Some of those people didn't make it. These organizations were now tracking survivor groups. Not with hostile intent, Todd said, using that phrase specifically. With the intent to know where stable populations were forming. Because the next phase, and he used that phrase specifically too, next phase, required knowing where people were. I asked what the next phase was. He said, "I genuinely don't know. I wasn't briefed on it. I'm a tier below that." "The radio signal," I said, "the one I picked up the first week. Number groups, military format." His face changed, not dramatically, just a flicker of something. "You have radio equipment?" he said. "I'm a line tech," I said. What was the signal? He said, carefully. I don't know specifically, but coordinate transmissions in that format are they're usually tracking something large. Population movements, events, things that need to be positioned on a map. What events? He didn't answer. What's coming that's larger than what's already here? I said. He looked down the slope at the trees. Somewhere below us, the Illinois River was moving. The sound of it came up the hill when the wind was right. I really don't know, he said. I was told to find stable survivor groups and track them. That's all I was told to do. He paused. I think the people telling me to do it know something else. I think there's something else they haven't shared. I looked at him. He looked back. I've been around enough people in my life to have a reasonable read on when someone is telling me something they believe. And I believed that he believed what he was telling me. Whether what he believed was accurate was another question. I took the device from his pack that evening. He didn't resist. I didn't throw it in the river. I thought about it and then decided that knowing it was there was more useful than getting rid of it. If whoever was tracking us wanted to find us, they'd find us regardless. Having the device meant I could choose when to turn it off and on. That felt like leverage. I put it in my toolkit, deep in the back, green light still on. Todd stayed. He didn't offer more information, and I didn't push. What we had was an understanding, which is not the same as trust, but is not nothing. Days, 15 through 20, were the days the cooperative started to feel like something real. I want to tell you about that because I think people who haven't been through something like this imagine that survival in a place is just the dramatic parts, the close calls, the discoveries, the confrontations. But most of it was something else. Most of it was work that made your hands hurt and your back ache and wore you down in a good way, the way work does when the work matters. We cut wood. This was the biggest daily task as the temperature dropped. Real October cold was coming in now, the kind that in eastern Oklahoma can be surprisingly sharp at elevation, and we needed fuel for the small iron stove in the main building that had been there since the 70s. The cooperative had let the woodlot at the far end of the ridge go natural for decades, and there was dead wood everywhere, downed trees, standing dead stuff, a whole winter's worth if you worked for it. Brett and Kevin and Todd ran the chainsaw in rotation. I split. Hank directed us to the right trees. Ruth stacked. We fished. Brett's morning trip to the river became a routine that everyone built around. The rest of us would be doing other things, and around mid-morning, Brett would come back with whatever the river had given him that day, and it went directly to Patty, who'd taken on the cooking because she said it gave her something with its hands in it, and she needed that. She was good at it too. She had the resource management instinct of someone who'd run a household on a limited budget for decades, and she stretched what we had in ways I wouldn't have thought of. I worked on the radio every evening. The setup I'd rigged in the main building was better than the depot's had been. I'd found a length of antenna cable in the workshop and strung a dipole out from the main building's roof, which improved my range considerably. I was hearing more, not clearer exactly, but more. The amateur radio operator in Muskogee, K5WXR, was still on the air. His name was Donald. I learned over several evenings of back-and-forth transmission. He was 68 years old, retired phone company worker, had been a ham operator for 40 years. He'd converted his garage into a full radio station and was running off a bank of car batteries charged by 2 solar panels on his roof. He had food for several months. He was alone, his wife having died 2 years prior. His adult daughter, who'd been in Oklahoma City, he didn't know what had happened to her. He'd tried to get information and couldn't. I told Donald about us, about the cooperative. He added us to what he called the network. He'd been in contact with maybe a dozen other survivor locations scattered around eastern Oklahoma and into Arkansas. He gave me the frequency schedule he used to reach them, and I started listening in on the network calls. The network told a story. The story was, things were worse in cities. Things were better in rural areas. Things were worst in the river valleys and flat ground where large populations had been, and where infected moved freely. Things were more manageable in the hills and the forest, where terrain limited movement. Survivor groups who had stayed put in defensible locations were generally okay if they had food and water. Groups who'd tried to move, especially through urban corridors, had taken losses. Donald also told me something else. He'd been in contact with a location in Arkansas, east of Fort Smith, in the Boston Mountains, where a group of about 40 survivors was saying they'd been in contact with an official response of some kind. Not military, they said. Different. People with equipment and resources showing up, asking questions, taking a census of their numbers and supplies, offering vague reassurances, not offering rescue. Taking a census, I said. That's what they said, Donald confirmed. He used good, clear protocol, Donald. The kind of radio etiquette that comes from decades of it. Of people, not of the infected. Of people, he confirmed. I sat with my headphones on, and the radio humming, and the fire in the iron stove in the corner, making its quiet tick. Outside, the wind was up. Mid-October, elevation, full dark. The cooperative smelled like wood smoke and cooked fish, and damp wool drying near the stove. Somebody, I think Kevin, was snoring from his corner of the main room. I thought about coordinates, about the number groups I'd transcribed that first week, about Todd's device pinging our position to someone with access to satellite communication, about organizations that knew before the public, about the census in Arkansas. Somebody was counting. Hank found something on day 18 that I think is worth including here. He'd gone down to the river in the morning with Brett's fishing pole, and no particular goal, just to walk and think. Hank did that. He walked and thought, and the walking and thinking were the same activity. He'd been doing it more in the past few days, I'd noticed. He hadn't said what was on his mind. He came back without fish, but with something he'd found in the tree line near the river, a trail camera, the kind hunters put up on trees to photograph deer movement. It had been there a while, longer than us. The mounting strap weathered into the bark, but the camera itself was powered. A small red LED on the back that meant battery still alive, probably a lithium battery. The camera was pointing back up the slope toward the ridge, where the cooperative sat. Someone had put a camera there before us, before any of this, pointed at the cooperative. Hank held it out, and I turned it over in my hands. I looked at the lens. The cooperative was visible from this angle, about 400 yards, the main building, and the fence, and the approach. That's been watching us since we arrived, I said. Watching whoever arrived, Hank said. We looked at each other. Whoever put this here, I said slowly, knew someone might come to the cooperative. Or was watching to see if anyone did, Hank said. I took the camera inside, and Brett opened it up. It was the kind with a standard memory card, and the card was in it. We didn't have a camera to read it with, and we didn't have a computer we could plug it into. The card sat on the table for 2 days before Kevin, who'd apparently had a trail camera hobby before the world ended, remembered he had a card reader in his truck cab, in a box of miscellaneous tech stuff he'd thrown in when he left Vion. We read the card that evening. I brought the small laptop Ruth had brought from the clinic. It still had battery life. We charged it from the generator sparingly, and we looked at what was on the card. The images were dated. They went back 3 years, and they showed deer in the early ones, expected. Then, about 18 months ago, a series of images of a man, the same man each time, in different seasons, standing at the cooperative fence line, looking at the building, walking the perimeter, taking notes in a small notebook. Professional clothes one time, outdoor gear another, never the same. No markings. No ID visible. Just a man systematically observing the cooperative over an 18-month period. The last image on the card was dated 9 days before the Tuesday when the radio went silent. The man was standing at the gate, and the gate was open, and he was looking directly into the camera, as though he knew it was there. The image was slightly overexposed in the morning light. You could see his face clearly. Todd Parrish looked at that image for a long time when we showed him. His face did nothing. "Do you know this man?" I said. "No," he said. I watched him say it. I think he was telling the truth. But I also think he recognized something about the image that he wasn't going to share with me, and that the specific shape of his not sharing it told me that the man in the image was relevant to whoever Todd worked for. We didn't talk about it more that night. Day 22. I want to take a minute and tell you what daily life at the cooperative looked like by now, because the rhythms of it had settled into something that felt not normal, Nothing was normal, but sustainable, functioning. We woke up with the light. We'd started sleeping by full dark, because the generator noise was a concern at night, and we wanted to conserve fuel. So our days shaped themselves to the sun, the way people's days shaped themselves to the sun, for most of human history. Hank told me once, offhand, that this was how his grandfather's generation had lived, before rural electrification reached this part of Oklahoma. Not as a nostalgic thing, just as an observation. Breakfast was whatever Patty made from what we had. She'd developed a rotation that squeezed the maximum nutrition and caloric value from our supply inventory, and she tracked it in a small notebook she kept in her shirt pocket. What we'd used, what we had left, what we needed. Her handwriting was small and precise, and her math was always right. I checked it twice in the first week, and stopped checking after that because checking it was pointless. After breakfast, the daily task list. The wood cutting operation continued, because we needed more wood than we were cutting, always. The fence needed a new post on the southwest side where a section had started to lean. I needed to work on the water line. I'd found the old pipe infrastructure for the cooperative, a gravity-fed system that had once run from a spring tank up the ridge, and I was slowly rebuilding it. If I could get the spring tank functional, we could have running water in the main building, which would change our daily work enormously. Hank scouted. Not every day, but several times a week. He'd take the smaller truck on one of the back routes and come back with information, and sometimes supplies from the supply caches he'd placed. He found a cache on day 19 that had a significant medical inventory. The Cherokee Nation Emergency Supply Program had included first aid resources, and what this particular cache had was advanced enough that Ruth actually made a sound when she opened it. "This is real equipment," she said, going through the contents. "This is not gas station stuff." "We planned for situations," Hank said. "Your nation planned for this specifically?" "We planned for being cut off," Hank said. "We've had experience with that." He said it without bitterness, just directly, and then he went back to his map. The daily routine continued. Fishing in the morning. Brett, the river, never failing him. Afternoon work. Evening meal. Radio session after dark on battery power. The generator shut down. The main room lit by oil lamps we'd found in the storage building and filled from a 5-gallon container of lamp oil that had no business being as useful as it was. Kevin turned out to be a decent conversationalist in the evenings. He'd had a small store, convenience, gas, small deli counter, and he had the social ease of a man who'd spent years talking to everyone who came through his door. He told stories about his customers. Not sentimental, not overdone, just specific. The guy who came in every morning for 30 years for the same coffee and the same newspaper, and one day stopped, and Kevin had never found out why. The family that had driven through every summer on vacation, who always bought the same specific chip brand that Kevin had started stocking just for them. Small stories, true ones. They made the evenings feel inhabited. Brett had started whittling. He'd found a folding knife in the workshop and a pile of downed hickory branches, and somewhere between the day we arrived and day 20, he'd started carving things in the evenings. Rough stuff. Small animal shapes mostly, nothing skilled, but he kept at it, and they got less rough. He'd line them up along the windowsill of the main building. A bear, something that might have been a dog, a person, abstract, just the rough shape of standing. Ruth was keeping medical records. On a notepad she'd brought from the clinic, she was tracking everyone's health status, medications, any symptoms. She was monitoring Patty's glucose levels with the monitor we'd brought from Stillwell, and adjusting her diet recommendations accordingly. She was managing this the way she'd managed an ER, with system, with anticipation, finding problems before they became crises. I was keeping the radio going and the generator running and working on the water line, and I was thinking about my sister, and I was watching Todd. Todd was contributing. He was working. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, but he was quieter since our conversation on the fence line, and in his quietness, there was something that felt like waiting, like a man who knows something is coming and is waiting for it to arrive. I didn't ask him about it again, not yet. I was waiting too. The spring tank took me 4 days to get functional. It was an old galvanized steel tank at the top of the ridge, buried to the shoulders in the clay. fed by a natural seep that emerged from the limestone about 30 feet uphill. The original pipe from the tank to the main building was galvanized iron, which had corroded and broken in 2 places underground. But I found most of the root of it by following a shallow depression in the ground and digging carefully. The breaks I repaired with sections of plastic PVC I found in the workshop. Not perfect connections to galvanized iron, but I had transition couplings in my work kit, and I made it work. It took pressure calculations that I did in my head, checking my math twice, and a slow test fill that I ran over about 3 hours, monitoring for leaks before I let it go to full. On day 21, water ran in the main building for the first time since probably the 1990s. It came out of the old kitchen faucet brown at first, all the iron sediment in the old pipes washing through, and then clearing, slowly, until it ran clean and cold. I stood there with my hand under it and let it run over my palm. Patty came and looked. Then she put her hands under it. Then she started crying, which was the first time I'd seen her cry. And she was not embarrassed about it. She just cried for about 30 seconds, and then wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, "Good. Now I can actually wash things properly." That was the moment where the cooperative shifted from emergency camp to something else. Something that felt, if you didn't think about it too hard, like the beginning of a life. Day 22 was when the radio did the thing. I was in my usual evening session, headphones on, scanning through the frequencies I'd established as my regular checkpoints. Donald's network, the amateur bands, the government frequencies I could reach. Everything was normal for the first hour. Donald came on at his scheduled time and did his network check. 4 of the other groups answered, including us, which was more than usual. He told me there was now a group of survivors somewhere in the Cookson Hills north of us that had started coming on air, which was good news because it meant the area between us and them might be manageable. Then I went to the government frequency ranges, the ones where I'd heard the number transmissions in the first week. What I found there was not what I expected. It wasn't number groups. It was a voice, a real, live voice, not a loop, not automated. A woman's voice, measured and calm, with the precise diction of someone reading prepared text. The signal was strong, much stronger than anything I'd received on those frequencies before. Either the signal source had moved closer, or the conditions were unusually good, or both. She was giving information, logistical information, movement schedules, supply delivery windows, location confirmations. The language was controlled and operational, words like extraction point, and secondary rally, and confirmed position, and civilian population count. She read numbers and then repeated them. She referred to locations by letter number codes I didn't have the key to. And then she said something that was not a code. She said, in the same even voice, "All monitoring assets are directed to stand by. Window 2 begins at OYO 600 local. Confirmation of all tracked positions required before 0500. All positions are confirmed in grid sectors." And she read 8 sets of coordinates. 8. I wrote all of them down. Then she said, "Priority flag, multiple locations, sectors 6 and 7. Large civilian populations confirmed it following grid references." And she read more coordinates, 4 more. And then, window 2 is a relocation operation. All prior tracking assets to maintain position and await further instruction. Do not approach subject locations. Repeat, do not approach subject locations. Static. I sat very still. Window 2 is a relocation operation. Relocation. Not rescue. Relocation. Sectors 6 and 7. I didn't have a grid key, but I was looking at the topographical map on the table next to me, and I was trying to match coordinate patterns to physical locations, and the ranges she'd given matched, roughly, what I'd expect to be eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas, our area. Large civilian populations. The groups Donald had been networking. The roadblock settlement of 14 people, the Boston Mountains group, us. I took off my headphones. I sat there for a moment in the quiet of the main room. The oil lamps, Kevin snoring, the iron stove. I went and woke up Hank. He sat at the radio table and read my notes twice. He looked at the map. He was quiet for a long time. Relocation, he said. Yeah, I said. Relocation to where? I didn't have an answer. On whose authority? He said. I didn't have that answer either. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, My people have a word for what happens when other people decide to move you somewhere without asking. We have several words for it. None of them are good. He got up and went to stand at the window. Outside was full dark and forest, and whatever was out there. I said, What do we do? He said, We get the others up. We got everyone up. All 6 of us, Todd included, sat in the main room at the folding table under 2 oil lamps, and I told them what I'd heard and showed them my notes. Nobody said anything for a while. Patty said, What time is it now? 11:40, I said. 0500 is 5 hours, she said. They want all positions confirmed in 5 hours. Todd, I said. He was looking at the notes. His face had a quality I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly. More like the face someone makes when the thing they've been dreading has a specific shape. Todd, I said again. I don't know what this is, he said. What do you know? Pause. Long one. I know that what I was doing, tracking survivor groups, was preliminary work, he said. I know there were phases after the tracking phase. I didn't know what those phases were. I was told the tracking was for humanitarian response planning. He looked at the notes. I don't know if that's what this is. Is it? Brett said. Todd looked at Brett. Brett was 22 years old and had a whittled bear sitting in the window behind him. He looked back at Todd with the specific directness of someone who hasn't had time yet in his life to learn how to look away from a hard question. I don't know, Todd said. Best guess, I said. Todd exhaled. Someone knows where every stable survivor group is. They know how many people. They know the locations. They have a timeline, and they're calling it a relocation operation. He looked around the table. If I had to guess, I would say that whoever is doing this has resources and has decided that the best way to manage the survivor population is to consolidate it, move people from distributed small groups to fewer large, camps, facilities, whatever they're calling it. And if we don't want to be relocated, Kevin said, then we need to not be where they think we are, Todd said, or we need to be a harder problem than they want to solve. The tracker, I said. He nodded. You turned it off. 2 weeks ago, I said. The last position it transmitted. Is the cooperative, he said. They know where you are. Patty made a sound. Not a word. Just a breath. Ruth put her hand on Patty's hand. Hank was standing. He'd been standing since I got him up, and he'd stayed standing. He was looking at the map. There are 7 supply caches, he said. I know where 7 of them are. Not all of them are on this ridge. He put his finger on the map. There's one, here, 22 miles north-northeast. It's at an old fire lookout station. The station is still standing. I checked it maybe 5 years ago. The structure's solid. The cache there is the biggest one I placed. Equipment, supplies, everything we have here and more. He looked up. Nobody else knows that location. It's not on any map I've seen outside of my own records. We all looked at where his finger was. That's where we'd go? I said. That's where we'd go, he said. I looked at my notes. 0600. 5 hours. We can't move in the dark on those roads. We move at first light, he said. We're packed before then. I looked around the table. Kevin said, I just got used to this place. I know, I said. Brett was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and went to the window and picked up the wooden bear he'd carved and put it in his jacket pocket. Okay, he said. What do we pack first? We packed for 3 hours. The spring tank and the water line stayed. We couldn't take infrastructure. The main things were the food, the medical supplies, Ruth's equipment, the tools I most needed, the radio, the ammunition from the hunting camp cache. We loaded the 3 vehicles in the dark, moving as quietly as 3 vehicles can be loaded, and I shut the generator down to stop the noise. The cooperative sat dark and quiet on the ridge, the fence we'd fixed, the stove we'd used every night, the water that ran clean from the old faucet, the windowsill where Brett had lined up his carvings. Before we left, Hank walked the inside of the fence line. I watched him from the gate. He walked it slowly, and when he got back to the gate, he looked at the main building one more time. I said, "You all right?" He said, "This land knew people for a long time before this." He looked at the building. "It'll be here after." We drove out at first light. The forest was dark and deep around us. The road was the same rough track we'd come in on, following the contour lines through the hills. Kevin's headlights behind me in the mirror. Brett and Ruth behind him. Dawn came up slow and orange through the trees on the ridge tops. Birds, wind, the river sound somewhere below and then gone as we climbed north. I drove and thought about my sister, about Donald in Muskogee on his radio, still broadcasting, about the woman's voice reading coordinates in a flat professional tone, about a man in a hazmat suit standing in the trees outside a depot fence, about what relocation operation means when it's an organization that knew in advance, that planned, that placed cameras at locations like the cooperative 18 months ago and sent people to track survivors after the world came apart. I thought about what you call it when someone decides on your behalf where you're going. Hank was navigating from memory. The fire lookout road wasn't on the map he had. He was running it from 30 years of knowing this ground. He gave me turns calmly, unhurried, like he knew exactly where his feet would land on dark ground. Like a man who trusts the land, because the land has been his longer than the road maps. We came around a ridge curve as the sun cleared the tree line, and the valley below opened up. I could see for miles. Hills going green, brown, orange into the distance. River lines silvering through the bottom. A sky that had nothing wrong with it. Todd, in Kevin's truck behind me, had been quiet all night. He'd packed his things without argument and worked the loading line and not asked any questions about where we were going. I thought about the tracker in my toolkit, green light off. I thought about what he'd said, "They know where you are." What he hadn't said was, "They're coming specifically for you." Maybe that was true, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe the relocation operation was genuinely something survivable, and maybe it wasn't. I had no way to know. What I knew was this ridge, and this road, and these 5 people behind me, and a man in front of me who knew where the next cache was. My radio crackled. I reached for it, habit, and stopped. It crackled again. Not voice, not static exactly. Something in between. A frequency characteristic I recognized from my professional training as the sound of a carrier wave being held open. Something was transmitting in the area. Something close. I said to Hank, "Do you hear that?" He listened. Transmission? "Something nearby," I said. "Not us." I kept driving. The crackle faded as we climbed the next ridge, and then came back when we crested it. Whatever was transmitting was directional. It was ahead of us. North, in the direction we were going. I pressed the push-to-talk on my handset. "Convoy, stay together. Do not stop unless I stop." Kevin's voice. "Copy." Brett's voice. "Copy." We drove north. The road came out of the trees for about a half-mile on a high ridge spine. No canopy, exposed. The sky huge. And it was on this section that I saw the vehicle on the ridge above us. Parked. White or light gray. On a high point I didn't have a road to. A box truck or a van. No markings visible at this distance. It wasn't moving. It was pointed at us. I kept driving. I watched it in my mirror. It didn't move. It didn't follow. When the road dipped back into the trees, it disappeared. "Was that a camera?" I said. Hank had been watching it too. "Maybe?" "They already know," I said. "Maybe," he said again. And then, "Turn here." The turn he gave me went off the ridge spine into a creek drainage that dropped steeply through dense timber. A track so faint I'd have missed it without direction. We dropped into the timber, and the white vehicle on the ridge was gone. I drove, and I didn't know what was behind us or ahead of us, or whether the fire lookout was going to be what Hank said it was. I drove, and the trees closed in, and the radio crackled once more, and then went quiet. The fire lookout was exactly what Hank said it was. Steel stairs, a box structure on top, 4 walls of windows, a ladder to a small catwalk above. The tower was 70 feet, and from the top, you could see 30 miles in every direction. The cache Hank had buried at the base of the tower stairs was the largest of the 7. He had to dig down about a foot to reach the sealed lid, and the contents, when we opened it, were enough that Ruth actually put her hands on her hips and stood there looking at it for a moment. We carried everything up and into the tower structure. It was tight, 6 people in the box up top, but the windows gave us the world, gave us every direction. There was no way to approach this tower from any direction without being seen from above. The morning sun came through the southeast windows and put long rectangles of light across the floor. I could see the ridge where we'd seen the white vehicle. From here, from this height, I could see anyone who went near there. Nothing moved on that ridge. Patty sat down with her back against the east windows and opened her small notebook and started a new page. She wrote the date. She wrote our head count. She wrote our supply total. She wrote the number of days she estimated we had at current consumption levels. I watched her write, the beaded chain of her reading glasses against her chest, the careful small handwriting. Brett put the carved bear on the windowsill of the lookout. Hank went to the west-facing windows and stood there looking at the hills. Kevin unpacked food and set up the camp stove. Ruth organized the medical cache with the same systematic efficiency she brought to everything. Todd sat in the corner and said nothing, and I did not look at him. I set up the radio. It took 40 minutes to string a proper antenna between the lookout structure and a tree below, and another 20 to get everything configured. The elevation gave me range I hadn't had at the cooperative. I could hear more stations, farther away, more clearly. I found Donald immediately. He was on his schedule. He was talking to the network, and I keyed in. "Holt," he said, and his voice was steady as always, the voice of a man with 40 years of radio discipline. "You've moved." "Moved," I said. "Higher, better position." "The network has some strange traffic tonight," he said. "Other groups in your area are. There's been some disruption. Some groups have gone quiet." "What kind of quiet?" I said. "The kind where they were on the schedule last night and not tonight," he said. Pause. "I've lost 3 groups. Not transmission failure. Groups had been regular for weeks and just stopped." I wrote that down. I looked at the number. 3 groups. In the past 24 hours. "Donald," I said. "Frequency monitor, range, anything unusual in the government bands tonight?" Pause on his end. There was a significant transmission block earlier. Coordinated. I've never heard anything quite like it. It was like a full-spectrum management event, the kind you'd use to push out civilian traffic from a range. He paused again. "Military does that. FEMA does it. But civilian? You just don't have the equipment." "No," I said. "You don't." I sat with the headphones on and looked out the south-facing windows at the hills going dark in the late afternoon light. The air was cold now. October deep in the Ozarks. Elevation, coming on toward dark. From up here you could see a lot of nothing and a lot of something, and the difference between them was the only thing that mattered. I thought about the groups that had gone quiet. 3 groups, gone from the network. I thought about what Todd had said, relocation operation. I thought about the coordinate sets I'd written down. I thought about whether the coordinates were positions of survivor groups or positions of something else. I did not think about rescuers. Below the lookout, the forest was going dark in sections as the sun dropped behind the western ridges, one section at a time, like lights going out. My handset crackled. Not Donald's station. Different frequency, different signature. The same characteristic from the road this morning, that held carrier wave, something transmitting nearby. It didn't resolve to voice. It was just the wave, held, like a hand raised in the dark from somewhere I couldn't see. I held the handset and listened to it for a long time. Then I set it down and went to where Hank was standing at the west windows. "There's something transmitting," I said, "from somewhere close. I can't get direction, but it's nearby." He looked at the dark forest. "Could be another survivor," I said. "Could be one of Todd's people. Could be something else," Hank said. "Could be," I said. We stood there together, looking at the hills going dark. "I've been on this land for 30 years, he said. "I know where things are. I know where things were." He paused. "I put these caches out 10 years ago because I thought, not this specifically, but something like this. Something where the land might be the difference between having a place and not having one." "It's been the difference," I said. He nodded. "For now. For now is all we have," I said. He looked at me. Then he looked back at the forest. "There are things in those hills I've been thinking about," he said. "Old places. Places that aren't on maps, that people with clipboards and vehicles don't know. Places where the land itself is different." He stopped. "I'm not sure how to say this to someone who isn't from here." "Try," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "There are places in these hills where people have been gathering for a long time, longer than the county road system, longer than the Cherokee Nation as a legal entity even. Places where you go when you need to go somewhere that can't be found easily." He turned from the window. "I know where some of them are." I looked at him. "I've been thinking," he said, "that when this lookout is no longer good enough, those places might be the next thing." I didn't say anything to that. I just stood there with it. Then from downstairs, Kevin called up that the food was ready, and we went down and ate. The transmission came at 2 a.m. I was on watch. The others were sleeping in the lookout box, spread across the floor in whatever was comfortable, and I was at the radio with the volume low and the heat from everyone sleeping in the small space, making it warmer than it probably should have been. The frequency I'd found the military format transmissions on before, the one with the coordinate groups, it came alive. Not the woman this time, a man. Different protocol, slightly less controlled. He was reading things fast, not the measured cadence of a prepared text, more like someone reading in real time from a screen they were watching. He said coordinate groups fast and moved on. He mentioned sector numbers. Then he said something that stopped me cold. He said, "Sector 7, primary objective grid," and read a grid reference that, when I looked at the topographical map with a flashlight, was close, very close, within 12 miles of the fire lookout. Then he said, "Sector 7 is now clear. Population transfer complete. Proceeding to Sector 8. Sector 7, population transfer complete." I sat very still with the headphones on. Population transfer complete. I wrote it down 3 times in my notebook. I don't know why 3 times. My handwriting was not as steady as usual. I thought about the 3 groups that had gone quiet on Donald's network. I thought about a woman's voice saying relocation operation and a man's voice saying population transfer complete. And I thought about the white vehicle on the high ridge and the carrier wave in the forest and the trail camera at the cooperative and an organization that had deployed people in hazmat gear before the public outbreak even registered. Sector 8. What was in Sector 8? I flipped through the topographical map. Sectors weren't marked on it because sectors were their system, not mine, and I didn't have the key. But if Sector 7 was 12 miles south of us, then Sector 8 on a northward moving operation might be... I put the map down. I put my headphones on the table. I went to Hank and put my hand on his shoulder, and he was awake before I'd completed the motion, the way people sleep when they've been paying attention their whole lives. He read my notes with the flashlight. He looked at the map. He looked at me. "How fast can we move?" he said. "The trucks are loaded," I said. "We never fully unloaded." He looked at the others sleeping. "Where?" I said. He was already folding the map. "I told you," he said. "There are places in these hills that people with clipboards and vehicles don't know." He stood up. He went to the east-facing window and stood there looking at the pre-dawn dark. "We go quiet," he said. "No generator, no radio transmission. We move small, and we move quiet, and we go somewhere that isn't a building and isn't a road. Into the forest," I said. "The forest is ours," he said. He said it the way you state something you've known your whole life. I went to get the others up. Todd was already awake. He was sitting against the wall with his eyes open. He looked at me and I looked at him and I said, "Whatever you were reporting to, it's moving this way." He said, "I know. You still want to be with us." He looked at the floor. Then at the window. Then at me. I made a mistake, he said. I thought the organization I was working with was... He stopped. I thought it was one thing. I think it might be something else. Yeah, I said. I want to be with you, he said. I looked at him for 5 seconds. That's not a long time, but it was the time I had. Get your pack, I said. We moved out of the lookout at 4:30 in the morning. Not in the trucks, not at first. We carried what we needed on our backs. Hank took the lead, and I came last, and in between was everyone else, moving single file through the dark, with headlamps at the lowest setting. The trees were close, and the ground underfoot was rocky, and the slope was significant, and we moved slowly. 40 minutes, maybe, to the creek bottom where Hank had led us. The creek was shallow, 20 feet across, cold. We crossed it and came up the far side into a hollow that opened unexpectedly into a flat-floored space between 2 ridges where the trees were old, really old. The kind of trees whose canopy was 30 feet above your head and whose trunks needed 2 people to reach around. Nothing about this hollow was on any map I'd ever seen. Hank stopped in the middle of it. He said, "Here." I looked around. It was a space about an acre in size. The ridges on either side blocked wind. The canopy blocked sky. There was a spring seep at the far end where water welled out of the ground into a small pool. The ground was deep leaf litter over rock, solid footing. You couldn't find this place without someone showing you. We set down our packs. I went back for the trucks. Todd came with me. He didn't say anything, just fell in beside me, and I let him. We drove the trucks around the backside of the lookout ridge on a track Hank had told me about, down into a logging area about 2 miles off, and we got the trucks into a dense second-growth thicket and covered them with cut branches. Not invisible, but not visible from a road. From the air, maybe. From the road, no. We walked back. The hollow was quiet, in the way deep forest is quiet, full of sound, birds and water, and wind in the high canopy, but none of it was threatening. The others had started setting up, the practical work of camping in a new place, and there was the smell of the propane stove, and Patty was looking at the spring seep with the same assessment she brought to everything. "Drinkable?" she said. "Needs purification," I said. "We have tablets," she said. "We have tablets," I said. She went to get them. I sat down on a rock at the edge of the hollow and looked up through the canopy at the sky, starting to gray in the east. An hour till sunrise, maybe more. Somewhere behind us, south, in the direction we'd come from, I could hear something that might have been vehicles on a road, or might not. Sound does strange things in the hills. I sat with my radio in my lap. I didn't turn it on. Whatever was transmitting out there, I didn't want to receive it right now. Brett came and sat near me. He had the carved bear in his hand. He turned it over and looked at it. He said, "What do you think they want?" "The relocation people." I said, "I think they want to control the situation. Every situation. This one included." "Is that evil?" he said. I don't know if that's evil." I thought about that. I think controlling people's lives without their choice is a bad thing regardless of intent, I said. I don't know if that makes the people doing it evil, but it makes the thing they're doing wrong. He was quiet for a while. Then, "My dad used to say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions." "Your dad was probably right," I said. He put the bear down in front of him on the rock. The little shape of it, rough carved, not quite recognizable as a specific kind of animal, more like the idea of an animal, something alive in the general shape of it. "What do we do?" he said. I said, "Today we stay quiet. We let whatever is happening south of us happen. We assess from this position. And then? And then we see what the land looks like after." He picked up the bear and held it in both hands. Ruth came over. She sat on the other side of me. She said, "I want to tell you something. When I was in the clinic, alone, those first 4 days, I made a list, in my head, of what I was going to need if I ever got out." "Yeah?" I said. "I didn't put on the list most of the things I thought I'd put on it. Not specific supplies, not a plan." She looked at the canopy. "I put on the list People who know what they're doing and mean it. She looked at me. That's what I found when you knocked on my door. I said, we're figuring it out as we go. That's what knowing what you're doing means, she said. The light was coming up now, the gray of early dawn filtering down through the canopy. The spring seep caught some of it and threw it back in small points of light. Kevin called from across the hollow. Food's hot. We got up and went. I'll tell you what I know as of now. It's been 25 days since Tuesday morning, when I was 40 feet up a pole and the radio went quiet. I know that the infected are real and numerous and move towards sound and can't be reasoned with and are dangerous in groups and manageable in ones and twos if you're careful and quiet. I know they don't think. I know they don't climb. I know that understanding their limitations is the most important survival knowledge there is about them. I know that the greater danger, right now, at this moment in this hollow with these people, is not the infected. It's the people who have decided that the end of the world is a resource management problem and that we are one of the resources. I know Hank. I know that what he knows about this land is deeper than any map and more reliable than any plan I could make myself, and that the best thing I can do is stay close to him and pay attention. I know Patty is going to run out of insulin in roughly 6 weeks at current usage, and that this problem is solvable if we're smart about it, and that we are going to be smart about it. I know Ruth is the most practically valuable person I've ever met in any context, before or after the world ended. I know Brett is going to be fine. He's 22, and he's scared, and he keeps going anyway, which is all fine is. I know Kevin wants to talk about his customers, and I'm going to let him, because his customers were real people who were alive 6 months ago, and remembering them is a kind of witness, and witness matters. I know Todd Parrish is a man who made a mistake and is trying to figure out what that means for him, and that he's more useful honest than as an enemy, and that I'm going to keep watching him for a while before I fully decide. I know my sister's name is Leanne, and she lives in the Brady Arts District in Tulsa, and she has a cat named something I always forget, and she once drove 8 hours round trip in a single day to help me move into a bad apartment because I asked her to. I know that not knowing if she's alive is a weight I carry in my chest every hour. I know that staying alive is the only thing I can do about it, and so that's what I'm doing. I know that somewhere south of us, something is happening that I can't see from here. Something that started when an organization with resources and preparation decided that the collapse of civilization was an opportunity to restructure it. I don't know what they're building, and I don't know where they intend to move the people they're moving, and I don't know if the people being moved are consenting. I know that in this hollow right now, with a spring seep and a propane stove, and the people I listed above, I have something that the organization with their white vehicles, and their coordinate systems, and their sector numbers, doesn't know about. I have this specific acre of land in a hollow between 2 ridges in the Ozark foothills of eastern Oklahoma that isn't on any of their maps. I have Hank Clearwater, who knows 7 other locations like this one. I have the radio. That last one matters, because I know Donald is out there, 68 years old with car batteries and solar panels in Muskogee, talking to the network, keeping track. If I can get him the information I have, the transmissions I've recorded, the coordinate sets, the carrier wave frequencies, the pattern of groups going quiet, maybe he can get it to someone who can do something with it. Maybe other survivor groups can move the way we moved. Maybe some of the groups that haven't gone quiet yet can go quiet in the way we've gone quiet. Not dead quiet, not defeated quiet, just strategically, quietly, off the grid of whatever system is trying to track them. I know that transmitting my own location is a risk now. I know that every time I key up, I'm announcing myself. But I also know that going completely dark means being alone, and alone is how people die. So I'll transmit carefully. I'll transmit in short bursts on irregular schedules. I'll transmit enough to stay connected to Donald and his network. And I'll listen more than I talk, and I'll be as quiet as a 40-foot pole job where you're trying not to rattle the equipment and attract attention. I've been doing this kind of work for 11 years. Quiet, careful, physical work in high places, knowing where every cable runs, understanding systems well enough to know where the failure points are. I know what a cascading failure looks like. I know that the radio went quiet on a Tuesday, and the world came apart, and I ended up in an Ozark hollow, with a retired dispatcher, and a lineman's apprentice, and an ER nurse, and a convenience store owner, and an old man who knows the land like his own hands, and a man with a tracker in his boot, who might or might not be on our side. I know that I'm going to transmit a compressed burst to Donald at dawn tomorrow. I know that when I get back on the air, I'm going to tell him what the carrier wave sounds like, and the frequency, and the coordinate patterns, and the phrase, Window 2 is a relocation operation, and I'm going to ask him to pass it to every group on the network. And I know that what comes after that, whatever the organization's next step is, whatever Todd knows that he's not saying, whatever is moving through Sector 8 toward Sector 9 toward whatever comes next, I'm going to face it from this hollow, with these people, with clean water from the spring and fish from the river, and a man who knows 7 places that aren't on any map. It's not enough. I know that too. But it's morning. The canopy is letting through strips of gold, and the spring is moving, and Patty is managing the food, and Brett is carving something, and the radio is charged, and Hank is standing at the edge of the hollow, looking at the ridges the way he looks at maps, like they're telling him something specific if he's patient. It's morning. We're here. That'll have to do for now.